Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name's Ivana if you are new here. If you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is Tuesday, May the 18th, and that can only mean one thing, and that is that the Alabama legislative session for this year is over. The regular session, I should say, is over. The last day was yesterday. Lawmakers went into the early morning hours or just at that brink to get some of these bills passed or to let some of them die. So we have our own Capitol reporter, Mike Cason, here. Mike is going to give us a little bit of an overview of what passed, what didn't pass, what died on the floor, and what we can expect next. So, Mike, I know you had a really late night - early morning. So thank you for being here and for updating us on all of these bills.
Thank you for having me, Ivana. Yesterday, there was the biggest, I guess, the most talked about bill of the entire session was the lottery and casinos bill. There was not much expectation it would come back tomorrow because it had died on May 6th, the last day the legislators met. It had stalled anyway. It was still technically alive, but it did not resurface yesterday. So the lottery and casino bill died for this session. So voters will not have a chance to vote on a lottery again based on anything that passed this session. Now, Speaker McCutcheon and the Senate leaders say they're not giving up and they could come back in January of next year when the regular 2022 session starts and get something on the ballot in time in November of 2022. So it's a setback, but they say they're still going to keep trying to work because they know people want to vote on this. They know people want to vote on a lottery.
So one thing I will go ahead and make clear is if I know there's a lot of people who probably don't follow the ins and the outs of the legislature like we do, and especially like you do, Mike. So quickly, let's talk about some language. One, when I say passed, I mean that the bill passed through and it is headed to the governor's desk awaiting signature. When I say dead, or when Mike says dead, we mean that it just didn't come up for a final vote yesterday. And considering that it didn't come up for a final vote, it basically just what we call died on the House floor, on the Senate floor, because it didn't come up for that final vote. So that is what we mean by that language. So we've got some people saying like, oh, no lottery, like great. But Mike, let's quickly clarify that even if that lottery or the gambling bill with the casinos, the lottery only, either way, if either of those bills, even if they had passed, they wouldn't have been available for voters to actually cast their ballot until next year anyway. Is that correct?
That's correct. The plan was to put that on the ballot in November 2022 when you have general election, you have large turnout. That was the plan. Now, back when Don Siegelman tried it in 1999, that was a special election. It failed. So I think people that support a lottery think it would do better in a general election. Well, I don't think there's much doubt. I think most everybody thinks it would pass anyway, but right. November 2022 is when it would have gone on the ballot.
So even if that bill would have passed, it wouldn't have gone on the ballot till next year anyway. So there is still a chance to get that on the ballot in 2022, even though it died this go around.
There's still a chance. There's some entrenched differences that are keeping it from passing. So remains to be seen whether that can be resolved. But yeah, there's still time.
So we know that was one of the top bills that were talked about during this 15-week session of the legislature 2021. Another one of those top bills that was really controversial this go around was a ban on treatments for transgender minors or minors who are transgender. So Mike, tell us what happened with that bill on banning those treatments and where that stands today.
That bill passed the Senate 2 months ago and appeared to have pretty strong support in the Republican majority, but there was a lot of opposition to that bill, especially from the parents, transgender youth that would have been affected. Some of the medical community was against it, and it just did not, just never came to a vote in the House. It was on the calendar on the 29th day, the 29th of the 30 days, Thursday, the May 6th. Never came close to coming up for a vote. It was at the end of the calendar. Last night, it was stuck at the end of the calendar and never had a chance to come up for a vote. So Speaker McCutcheon, afterwards, we asked him about it, and he said, last day we had to prioritize bills, and he said that one had a lot of was important for some political reasons, but there were other bills that were higher priority. So a lot of the advocacy groups are happy that bill died.
So that one, like you said, that's one that we're saying it died because it didn't get that final vote that it needed to head to the governor's desk. So
right.
Is that something that can be brought up next year, or will that bill kind of have to start back at day one, start back at ground zero before working its way back through?
It'll have to start back at ground zero. That always happens. But yeah, it could certainly be brought up again.
So we had that. Now, we also had another bill, and this was a little bit earlier in the session, but considering that we're wrapping up the session yesterday and today we're kind of giving an overview, I want to touch on it. And that was a bill that focused on transgender teenagers playing on sports teams. Can you give us kind of the overview of that one as well and where that stands?
Well, that one passed and the governor signed it into law. So that one, that one's on the books now.
Another bill that is already on the books was actually signed into law yesterday was that medical marijuana bill. A lot of people talking about that yesterday and this morning. Interesting that the governor did sign it on the last day of the session yesterday. Now, it should be noted that the last day of the session does not mean that it's the last day for the governor to sign it. She did have a period of time after the session, but it was signed into law yesterday. So, Mike, I'm sure you have heard a lot of feedback on that signature on that new law allowing medical marijuana in Alabama. So tell me a little bit of the feedback you've gotten on that. And did you expect the governor to sign it this quickly?
Yeah, I expected the governor to sign it because she had signaled that she wanted to sign it, that she appreciated the work. It was 3 years in the making. It was a study commission that looked at a lot of those issues, had public hearings, had doctors, lawyers, business reps on it. So it was carefully vetted. So I was not surprised that she signed it. As far as feedback, I haven't talked to that many people in the general public about it. I've gotten emails from people who want to be part of this industry. How do I become a cultivator and so forth? It's good. I think the bill gives it sets up a medical cannabis commission that's going to oversee this whole program. They've still got to be appointed, and they have to have rules in place by September 2022 for when companies can apply to be licensed participants in this industry, which will be all within Alabama. Plants grown, products made, products tested, products sold. Alabama doctors can recommend it. So it's going to be a totally intrastate program.
Interesting. And I know that you covered that pretty extensively, Mike. We're going to link that coverage here as well so people can read kind of about what you and I have been talking about. And if you have questions on that, let us know, and I will definitely send them over to Mike and get him to answer them. Now, question here of somebody talking about coronavirus cards. And I'm assuming what you're meaning, Cody, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that vaccine passport situation. That's what we have heard it called both locally and nationally here for a little while. And Mike, that was something the legislature did vote on yesterday and did end up going through, and that's a ban on vaccine passports. So tell us exactly what that means.
They did approve that bill, sent it to the governor. The idea was that this is an effort to prevent state and local governments from requiring a person to present documentation that they've been vaccinated to get any kind of government service or benefit or admission into a building. And also it would apply to businesses. Businesses could not require customers to show that they've been vaccinated to be admitted to a store, or, I think the senator on the floor he said he didn't want anybody to have to show a card to get in a doctor's office or a grocery store or go buy tires. So businesses can't make that requirement of customers. And some Democrats who were opposed to it said, no businesses are going to be doing this anyway. Why are we doing this? But it was an issue that people felt like it needed to be addressed.
That is something that we have heard so much talk about from people, again, across the country and locally over the past couple of months now that these coronavirus vaccines have become more widely available. I know even right now in Alabama, there is more supply of those vaccines than there really is demand at this point.
Right.
But Mike, that vaccine passport bill, we know that we have heard some people kind of saying it was almost for show, because as you mentioned, that there were a lot of people saying, look, businesses are probably not going to do this anyway. So if there was a business who said that they wanted to have a vaccine passport required for somebody to get in, or basically what that means is proof of vaccination, is there a fine for a business that does that and breaks this law, or what is the actual enforcement of this bill?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure that's addressed in the bill. I would have to look. I'm not sure that there's any kind of penalty addressed. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. I don't think there is, though.
That's one that's headed to the governor's desk for a signature. Now, interesting question here, and this is from Cody, and he says, does that also apply to events like football games or concerts? We know that an event like that is not necessarily a business, but what do we know about that, or do we know yet?
That's a good question too. I would think it does. Yes, an event like that there would be a business in charge of operating it. So yes, I would think that is the case. That would apply to sports events or concerts or any kind of gathering like that.
That's an interesting point, though, because I didn't really think about that, because it's not like a business like a Walmart will say that you're walking into. It's a little bit different. So we'll have to do some follow up there. Now we have.
I just wanted to say quickly, supporters of this law said, well, businesses can still require you to wear a mask. So they still have that option, but they just can't require you to pull out a card saying, look, I've been vaccinated. And governments can't issue a standardized proof of vaccination card.
Interesting point there again, Mike. We know that one is headed to the governor's desk for signature. Question here from Lawan, excuse me if I'm saying your name wrong. And he asked about that name, image, and likeness for student athletes.
That bill passed. I'm not sure the governor has signed it, but I think she probably has. That takes effect, I think, July 1st. But for practical purposes, it won't take effect until the NCAA approves rules to govern how that's going to operate. I think that's mostly in the court of the NCAA. And even the lawmaker who sponsored that bill said this is mainly protect our universities on the recruiting trail, because Florida had already passed a bill, and we want our colleges to be able to say, look, we're ready to start the name, image, and likeness benefits for athletes when the NCAA gives the go ahead.
And that's a really interesting bill as well. Again, we know that bill did pass. We've got some coverage of that from our sports reporters at AL.com as well. And if you are like me, and if you're going through some of those sports stories and you see NIL, that's what they're referring to. That acronym was thrown around, I think, a little bit before some of us even got word of the bill. So when you see NIL in some of those sports stories, that is what they are referring to. Lawan, let me know if you can't find it, and we will link it for you. Now, Mike, there was another bill that was interesting yesterday, and that was the ban on curbside voting. Now, that passed the legislature yesterday, headed again to the governor's desk for signature, but curbside voting is not even allowed in Alabama.
Right. It's one of those bills that the two parties took sharply different views of, but as far as practical effect, it's just questionable whether it really has much practical effect at all. Curbside voting became an issue in the presidential election, or in the election last year, because some groups in Alabama sued and said, filed a lawsuit and said, because of COVID, Alabama should be able to set up curbside voting where you just pull up and vote from your car. And a federal judge ruled in their favor and said, yes, counties should be able to offer this if they want to. Secretary of State Merrill and Attorney General Steve Marshall said, no, Alabama law doesn't authorize this. And they appealed, and the Supreme Court weighed in and blocked the ruling. So there was no curbside voting in Alabama. It's not clear there would have been any anyway, but anyway, that's on the books now, it's not on the books. legislature passed it. So we'll see if the governor signs that one.
Now, question here from Jessica, and I think this is a really good point, and she's, I believe, referring back to that ban on the vaccine passports. And she says, is that for people to actually go into a business to shop, or does that mean that it is for workers who are applying to work at said business? So is that ban for businesses to ask for vaccine, proof of vaccination for an employee or for somebody coming to shop?
For somebody coming to shop, that's where they can't require a vaccine passport. Businesses could still make that requirement of their employees. They still have that option to do that. This does not prevent businesses from doing that.
That's a good point, Jessica. So does it prevent businesses from asking for that proof to hire or to keep people working in their business? It is for people visiting that business. So good point there. Now, another bill that we know passed, again, headed to that governor's desk for signature, is the allowing of yoga in public schools. Mike, anything else about that bill?
Well, no, it's a bill that's gotten a good bit of attention. Back in 1993, the State Board of Education banned yoga from public schools in Alabama because of the connections to the Hindu religion. And Representative Jeremy Gray, who's a former athlete, former college football player at North Carolina State, I think it's the third year he's tried this bill, and because he says he knows the benefits of yoga from his athletic career, and thinks it's something that public schools could be beneficial in public schools as an elective, and the legislature finally gave it final approval last night.
Interesting one there. I know that is kind of one of those bills that when you're looking through this list, you kind of it catches you a little bit. So that's an interesting one. Glad for that point, Mike, about when it was actually made not allowed. We have a comment more than a question here from Alicia, but I think it's interesting. And she says there were so many things that the legislature put off last year because of COVID. So I'm unsure of why they tried to bring up so many new topics this session. Mike, what have you seen this session about the kind of recovering almost from last session being cut short?
Well, that's a good point. That's a real good point. There were bills like the medical marijuana bill last year, passed the Senate last year, and then never had a chance for consideration in the House. I'm sure there were many other. The yoga bill, I think, is probably another. But last year was pretty much limited to just passing the budgets and a few other things. And so legislatures did have to put off a lot of topics from last year to this year. So they played catch up on some things.
Questions in several different variations here about, again, back to that ban on the vaccine passports. This bill we know passed, again, headed to the governor's desk to sign into law, that ban on vaccine passports. Even if the legislature didn't pass that bill, didn't sign it and send it off to the governor, would different federal laws like HIPAA even allow a vaccine passport for businesses to happen anyway?
That's a good question that I don't know the answer to. I'm sure there would be legal questions about whether businesses could require you to show a, proof of immunization for admission. I'm sure that would have been a legal question and not necessarily something businesses were able to do anyway.
Looking through again the questions here, were there any? I know Parmi has a question on voting disparities for Alabamians who are blind. Were there any other voting bills passed? Any other bills that had to do with voting, whether that's voter ID, voting disparities, things like that?
There probably were. There was. I'm sorry. Nothing's coming to mind at the moment. I know one of the most talked about was a bill to allow you to vote absentee without giving an excuse, and that didn't pass. That was something Democrats supported. Well, there was a bill that there were quite a few voting bills, and there was one that makes it illegal to vote twice in the same election, which you would think that was already illegal, but
we had to clarify.
It said, I believe it said that you could not vote in another state and vote in Alabama in the same election. And apparently there was a loophole in the law where that was technically legal, and there had been some incidents where that happened, but that was passed. And I didn't mean to laugh at that like it was not serious, but it almost sounds like something that should have been illegal.
You have to laugh sometimes at things. You have to. And I think I do have to say, looking at some of these comments here going through on yoga in schools, I think it's kind of funny looking at some of the comments, because people are talking about when it was banned was because of the ties to the Hindu religion. And I actually went to a private religious school growing up, and we were allowed to have yoga. So it's just kind of funny sometimes when you look at the things. You have to laugh or you cry, right? But Parmi, I will definitely, me and Mike will dig in later and see if there are any type of voting laws or bills that dealt with disparities for blind Alabamians, or Alabamians who are blind, excuse me. And I will get back to you, Parmi, on that one if we have anything. So one more question, Mike, because I got a co-host in the back who is voicing his opinions. And that question is about education bills. Were there any bills regarding schools education that also passed or died in the legislature other than that yoga bill?
There was a bill that the legislative leaders said was really important, and there's a shortage of math and science teachers in Alabama. Pretty significant shortage, and they passed a bill that will set up a program where math and science teachers can make pretty good bit more money if they get certain credentials, and that's an effort to tackle that shortage of math and science teachers. And Alabama ranks poorly in math and science national assessment tests, and so that was a pretty innovative thing where math and science teachers can make up to $15,000 or so more a year than they otherwise would have made under this new program, which is called Teams. So that's a significant one.
Interesting. And I know that our education reporters and our education lab at AL.com will be covering those and doing a deeper dive into some of those education bills today and throughout the week as well. So, Mike, we appreciate your knowledge on all this, and especially getting up and being here after you pulled a real late night in the legislature. So you have earned your day today. Thanks
for having me, Ivana. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. And like I said, I got to go take care of my co-host downstairs because he's giving a very low rating to this show. So thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Everybody watching, thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow.